The group had been in a blind panic for the last few minutes. No one was really sure what they were running from, but if it spooked Mackenzie as much as it did, it must have been a good reason. They all worked together extremely well to try to escape the area, but Mackenzie knew they had to find shelter to stay alive. She didn't think she needed to tell people quite yet what they were running from, as she wanted everyone as calm as possible. Of course, in these games, that wouldn't last long. The sun was no longer visible behind the thick, dark clouds. Mackenzie knew these were the acid rain clouds, as they were a few shades darker than normal, but no one in the group had to know yet. She had to wait as long as she could before telling people. Mackenzie, you mind telling us what we need to run from? Alec asked. Yeah, please tell us. A few others chimed in. Mackenzie stopped, trying to catch her breath, looking at the sky. She calculated in her head how much time she had before it would shelter her death. Well, let's just say we need to find some legitimate shelter ASAP. Or else, Connor asked. Let's just find shelter fast, Mackenzie said in a nervous manner. Mackenzie, just tell us, Ian yelled. He seemed angry and seemed willing to make a move he might regret. All of a sudden, there was a thunderous boom from the sky. If people didn't know any better, they would have thought a bomb just went off in the sky. They looked up to see the clouds get darker and completely cover the sky. It looked like the middle of the night with how dark the clouds were. There was another boom from the clouds, followed by a large lightning strike that struck a few miles away from the position of the group. If the large bolt of lightning and loud boom of thunder weren't scary enough, the sky lit up green with each lightning strike. Panic started increasing within the group. This was no ordinary thunderstorm. Is that what we're running from? Heather asked. Well, it was, Mackenzie responded, but I think the best we can do now is hide. Guys, I think I found shelter, Jess yelled. The group ran over to Jess's position in the arena. Lo and behold, a cave was seen. Surely this would be enough to hide from the green lightning storm, right? As the group began to run to the cave, Giggs was spotted running towards the same cave. He was a lot closer to the cave than the rest of them, but he needed the head start. The group ran as fast as they could, trying to keep up with everyone else while not losing anyone in the process. There were obstacles in the way as wind started to pick up speed, sending leaves, branches, and other natural debris in the way of the group. Giggs had made it into the cave. He got under cover and turned around to see the horde of people running for his exact location. Hurry, he screamed, although with how loud the thunder was, it was impossible to hear him. Alec was at the front of the pack trying to bulldoze all the debris in the way so that the group could keep up. He knew that meant he would be the first to die in some unforeseen circumstance, but that wasn't his major concern at the moment, considering he might die anyways. As he approached the cave, he saw some rain falling in the distance. He knew they were running out of time. As he kept running, he saw some bright lights beyond the cave. The closer he got to the cave, the brighter the light got. He climbed a small hill and was able to see the bright light coming. He was able to see what the bright light was coming from. He suddenly stopped, staring at the gigantic fire from what seemed like was coming from the rain itself. It didn't make much sense to Alec. Usually rain helps put out the fire, not make them bigger. He turned around to see what the rest of the group where the rest of the group was. His jaw dropped. Holy shit, he yelled as he continued to stare behind him but run towards the cave. The group was so worried about running away from the spawn point to the group, they had no idea of the fire that was basically chasing them. And from the vantage point Alec had on his mini hill he realized what they were running from. Acid rain. Holy. He was interrupted by the loudest boom of thunder thus far. He turned back towards the cave just in time to see a giant green bolt happen to hit directly on top of the cave that Giggs was occupying. Alec watched to see the lightning bolt also had some acidity to it as the cave which was made up of rock, started melting away. Giggs looked up to see that his shelter was disintegrating by the second. The rain came over his head, burning his skin and his hair. The rain came down harder and harder over Giggs's position, and soon enough, he was being constantly burned by the falling rain. There was so much of it that it started puddling below him. Giggs, trying to move out of the way and stop the burns, stepped into the acidic rain puddle, setting his feet on fire. Alec watched on as he saw Giggs unable to avoid the downpour of acid rain and burn alive. What the fuck was all Alec was able to mutter before snapping back to reality. The result of the group had caught up to him, unknowingly stumbling upon a very drastic situation. Acid rain was falling from the direction they were running from and the direction they were trying to run towards. time was running out. Alec looked around quickly, looking for a place to go. He saw there was a large field untouched by any of the crazy weather. It led right back to the cornucopia, a structure that would 1,000% withstand the elements. He also knew some of the other shelters he had passed thus far in the games were in that direction, and they could also last through the weather. The problem was this field was large. There could be some other players sitting there ready for easy kills, which didn't make a whole lot of sense given that they'd be fighting for their lives in the rain as well. But he also knew that once he started running in the field, there was no turning back for safety. At this point, it was his only option. "Everyone, run this way," Alex screamed as loud as he could towards the direction of the field. He then began the sprint. The group was a little confused about why such a quick change of direction, but once they reached a visible sightline of the cave, they realized Alec knew what he was talking about. Slowly, the rest of the group started following Alec. Alec had a large distance between them and the next person in line, Connor. So he knew he had some time to think and possibly catch his breath. There were a few ways to go, so he had time to figure out which was the best way to go. He looked on to see the rain pouring near the cornucopia, but not damaging it or the structure in any way. He was right, and he knew that place was safe, but considering it was currently being surrounded by acid rain and fire, the cornucopia had to wait. There was a large hill they could climb with some significant high ground if anyone had the time to climb it. He was so far ahead of everyone else, he knew as long as he didn't stumble, he would be able to climb it safely. He didn't want to leave anyone behind, however, and it seemed like climbing it now would feel like abandoning the rest of the group. He turned back around to see the chaos that was chasing him. He thought back to the conversation he had with Jess a couple nights ago. They agreed that stopping BK was the main priority and that neither of them should worry about leaving the other behind if it meant being a step closer from stopping BK. Alec took a deep breath and started to trek up the steep hill. As he climbed, he heard screams through the thunder and rain. The storm was closing in and people were starting to get burned, literally. He looked back to see a small fire starting instantaneously that the ground maneuvered around. He saw a large moving fire in the distance that looked awfully similar to Giggs when he was burning. Sure enough, Alec saw arms and legs trying to run to find a way to put out the fire and stop the burning sensation. Alec didn't see who it was, but he counted 8 other people running towards him, so he knew that had to be someone else. A shame, but it was what it was. That was now 2 people dead because of the storm. He kept climbing towards the high ground. It was a workout to get to the top as the hill was steep enough to require climbing, but not steep enough where it was like rock climbing. Alec thought this would have been a good ski slope if this hill didn't happen to be in a murderous arena run by an insane man. He took a break to catch his breath and turned to see the rest of his group began to split up. He saw Connor at the bottom of the hill beginning his climb. He saw Lucy run the opposite way, looking for her own shelter. He saw Debbie running away he hadn't even explored yet, but with the clock ticking as fast as it was, this was not his problem to worry about. He looked on and saw Heather and Ian running side by side with each other, trying to get to safety. They were avoiding an ever-growing puddle of acid rain as they ran. It was growing so big so fast, it looked like it could be its own pond at this point. The pond looked very much like a water pond, as none of the grass around it was on fire or was disintegrating like Alec had seen before. Those two were near the back of the group, and the rain had started to catch up to them. Rain started hitting their clothes, burning through them fast before falling to the ground again. Heather looked to be in some extreme pain with each drop that hit her body. If this was what it felt like hitting her body, what would the rain feel like if it hit her skin? Heather sidestepped in avoidance of the rain. She was so worried about what was going on from the sky, she failed to notice a small log laying on the ground. She finally noticed the log, but only after it was too late. She tripped, her eyes glowing big, as if she knew if she fell, she would be in immense pain, if not dead. Instincts kicked in, and looking to keep her balance, she shoved Ian over to the side to try to stay up. Like Heather, Ian was so focused on the sky, he was unprepared for the shove in the back from Heather. Like her, Ian tried to prevent himself from falling. He turned and grabbed Heather, hoping she would keep him up. Heather, still trying to recover from tripping, couldn't brace from the weight of Ian. Ian pulled her down as both of them fell into the pond of acid rain that was now the size of a small lake. The pond swallowed them up as Alec watched 2 more comrades perish to the games. Alex shook off the scene he just witnessed and finished climbing the steep hill. He stood up under a tree, panting, gasping for air. The tree wasn't at all safe, but it could at least protect him for a few minutes once the rain came down on him. He just witnessed a third and fourth death in the last few minutes, his seventh overall. He had so little time to process the last couple of deaths that once he got to the top of the hill, he realized he had witnessed half of the deaths thus far himself. These games were brutal, and if no person in the arena or the arena itself wasn't going to kill him, the trauma would. 4 people died by this storm. 1 died trying to kill him, 1 died saving him, and 1 committing suicide. If he wasn't using most of his brain power to survive the storm, he would be furious with BK and all that support him. But that was to be thought about at another time. Connor had completed his climb and joined Alec at the top of the hill. Good thinking climbing up here, Connor said, breathing heavily. Who are we missing? Ian and Heather died. Lucy went the complete opposite way of us. Debbie went east. Alec responded, I don't know where the hell Mackenzie went. I saw her flee. She went her own way. So who does that leave us then? Them, Connor said, pointing at LB and Jess. Alec watched in horror as his best friend and his girlfriend still had a ways to go before finding temporary safety. The rain was almost upon them as they continued to run. He prayed that they would both find safety, but he didn't think any higher being could hear his prayer through the thickness of the storm clouds. Come on, get to safety, please, Alec murmured, holding back tears of fear. The 2 of them were running for their lives. They had never run this far or this fast without tiring out in their lives. The adrenaline that was pumping through their veins was the only reason they hadn't died yet. Jess, who was slightly ahead of LB, looked around a few trees. Look, I think that's a shelter. Hurry. I'm coming, LB said, gradually picking up speed. Jess was starting to slow down due to exhaustion, but she knew she had to keep fighting. LB started getting faster and faster with the acid rain right on his heels. He looked behind him for a second to see how much the distance between him and the rain decreased. As he turned back around, he stepped on the back of Jess's shoe, causing her to trip and fall. LB stumbled himself, but was able to stay on his feet. LB turned around to see if Jess was all right, but the rain was on top of him. The burning sensation he was trying to avoid was getting him now. He scoured at the seething pain through his teeth. Jess was down on the ground, getting rained on as well. Jess tried to get up, but she couldn't. It felt like a broken leg, but she didn't know for sure. It wouldn't matter in a second anyways without LB's help. LB, please. Ow. Please help me, she screamed as she continued getting rained on. LB looked at her. She was helpless. Without his help, she was a goner. He began making his ways towards her before he stopped. He thought to himself while hearing Jess beg for him in the background. She was dead without him, but if he tried to help her, they'd realistically both perish. He looked back at Jess as tears began rolling down his face. Please, LB, please, she whispered. She whimpered. I'm sorry, he mumbled to himself. LB, wait, please, LB. He ran off without turning back. Alec watched the whole thing happen. He just witnessed his best friend injure his girlfriend and then left her to die. The fumes were coming out of Alec rather quickly from the top of the hill. That son of a bitch, Alec yelled while tearing up. How could he? Alec, we have to go, Connor said. Like now. I must find him. Did you see what he did? He has to pay, Alec cried. Alec, we've got to go now, Connor said, pulling and restraining Alec from going down the hill. I can't. He has to pay, Alec said. He began running down the hill towards LB. LB turned towards the hill, hearing the commotion. He wiped some tears away, noticing Alec steaming towards him. LB never saw anger in Alec's eyes like that before, only in the Hunger Games. Traitor, Alec yelled. You're dead. Just as Alec had targeted LB, he felt a quick, sharp pain in his back. He instantly fell to the ground. Connor ran over to him, carrying a blow dart gun he had found. The dart wasn't lethal. It was a sleep dart. Connor began picking up his body as the rain started falling on his and Alec's position. Go, he yelled at LB. Take cover. LB left without any hesitation. Connor picked up and carried Alec's sleeping body back up the hill looking for shelter, like they were supposed to do in the first place. Connor, still carrying Alec's body, looked back on the field they just crossed and all the horror they just saw. With Jess's death, that meant there were only 9 players remaining as far as he knew. Just when he and the rest of the players thought there could be a way out, this happened. Now it felt like the games were right back at the beginning. Kill or be killed. The clouds hadn't disappeared yet, but the rain had. Lucy didn't know whether or not that meant a second wave of the storm, but she knew she had to enjoy every second. She wanted to find a place to rest, but there were still tons of acid puddles on the ground and the acidic rain droplets falling from the trees. So she had to keep walking until she found some shelter. She was tired. She had bags under her eyes. Her strength decreased significantly. The amount of energy she had left was solely focused on keeping her awake. She kept walking for a bit, looking for a place to go. The clouds were still dark and thick, and there were the beginnings of rumbling within the clouds. No sight of green lightning yet, but Lucy didn't want to take any chances. She picked up her pace and searched for a viable shelter and to stay in if another storm came down. Her feet were sore, and she thought if she looked at them, she would have some burn wounds as well. But she knew that that would be for a time when she was safe. Lucy didn't remember the last time she was truly safe inside the arena, if at all, so she figured she shouldn't look at them at all. Lucy eventually wound up finding a shelter. The cave was just slightly more protected, as this cave was inside a mountain. She didn't have to worry about the roof disintegrating on her like it did on Kig's. She got inside and immediately laid down. She was exhausted, and she was ready to fall asleep. She gathered a few leaves to make a makeshift bed. She got comfortable on the ground. As she was beginning to fall asleep, she heard some noise from within the cave. Immediately, her survival instincts kicked in as she realized she was not alone. The noise she had heard was getting louder and louder. The closer the noise got to her, Lucy began to see light coming beyond the cave. She picked up a couple rocks in the attempt to defend herself, knowing that this was a pretty lame way to defend herself. The noise stopped, and the light stopped getting bigger. Lucy refrained from letting her guard down. She wanted to make absolute sure she was safe. Out from the back of the cave came rocks, similar to the ones she was holding. The rocks were hurled right at her, so she had to use a lot of limited brain power to dodge the rocks flying in her direction. Amidst the commotion, Cullen appeared from the back of the cave, wielding a spear. He chucked it at Lucy, hoping to rid of the intruder. It merely grazed her arm, leaving a scratch on her arm. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, as the spot that was hit happened to be one of the few burn marks on Lucy's body. The spear landed on the ground as Lucy went to her knees, rather in extreme pain. Nice try, Lucy, but I think your time is up, Cullen mocked. She didn't respond right away. She was expelling so much energy to fight the pain she couldn't speak. Looks like you've been through it all out there. Here, let me put you out of your misery. Cullen walked past him to reclaim the spear. Lucy waited for the right moment before sticking out her foot, causing Cullen to fall. Lucy lunged for the spear, but Cullen was able to grab it before she got to the spear. They both wrestled amongst each other for the spear, but it was clear Cullen had more strength and energy than Lucy did. She knew she could not duel him at the moment. She didn't want to die, especially like this, so she knew she had to outwit him. Lucy tried to grab the spear out of Cullen's hands. No dice. Cullen laughed. You really think you stand a chance against me right now? That's too funny. Cullen ripped Lucy's hand off the spear. Lucy knew she needed patience to defeat him. She went for the spear again. Cullen ripped it from her grasp. Seriously, why are you even trying right now? You really want to die like this? Lucy glared at him menacingly. Yes, she was losing, but she didn't appreciate Cullen's boasting. She took a deep breath to muster up as much energy as she could to hold on to the spear. Cullen tried once more to rip it away from her, but she was resisting a lot better this time. The two played tug-of-war with the spear, pulling back and forth. Lucy knew she had Cullen in his trap. She waited for the right moment to execute her plan. Lucy pulled on the spear one more time as hard as she could. Cullen planted his feet deeper into the ground to get the best position to secure the spear. He began pulling the spear as hard as he could to rip it out of her hands. Just as he did, Lucy rearranged her hands on the spear and pushed it towards Cullen as hard as she could. Cullen fell to the ground with the spear sticking out of his body. Cullen, pulling as hard as he could, along with Lucy's force of her push, made the spear go clean through his body, about 10 inches of the spear were sticking out from his back. Cullen coughed up blood and looked at Lucy with dazed eyes. She had bamboozled him. Lucy chuckled. Oh, Cullen, she said condescendingly. You never stood a chance. Think smarter, not harder. Cullen looked at her as he was bleeding profusely, his pain immeasurable. It looks like you've been through it all out there. Here, let me put you out of your misery. Lucy grabbed the spear and pulled it out of Cullen's body, causing him to scream. He didn't scream for long as Lucy shoved the spear through his body once again, this time in a more lethal area. Lucy left the spear in the body as she laid down to finally get the rest she needed. Alec woke up in considerable pain, leaning up against a tree. He hadn't opened his eyes yet, but he could feel the warmth of the fire. From what his ears told him, it was just an ordinary fire. He wanted to move, but he didn't feel like he could quite yet. He endured a physical beating the last time he was conscious, so his body needed a minute to wake up. He tried to listen to any clues as to where he was without alerting whoever he was with that he was awake. All he heard was the crackling of fire and tinder. Once he had gained enough energy, he opened his eyes. Well, look who's awake. Alec didn't need to see to know whose voice that was. Hey, Connor, Alec mustard. You've had a long day, haven't you? Yeah, just Alec groaned, trying to move. No. Sit back down. Rest. Your body suffered a lot of burns from the raid. You need to recover first. How long would that take? Well, I guess that just depends on how generous some sponsors are, Connor said, poking at the fire to make it active again. So anyways, like I was saying, Alec realized Connor wasn't talking to him. Who are you talking to? He asked, his eyes closed. Oh, it's Tegan. Don't worry, he means no harm. Alec's eyes opened big. He moved around to get into a position to make sure Connor wasn't lying. Sure enough, he wasn't. Hey, Alec, Tegan waved. You? Alec snarled, slowly creeping over towards him, fighting through the pain. I have a bone to pick with you. And you'll worry about that later, Connor said, pushing Alec back to the tree, causing Alec to groan. You don't understand, Connor. No, I do. Tegan told me everything, pretending to be dead, killing Seb, almost killing you twice. I got the gist. Alex stared directly at Tegan. He remembered the first time he almost died to Tegan, but the second time, he had no recollection of it. Look, Alec, I'm sorry about what happened. I haven't been able to live with myself since that day, and I just want to make things right. Alec just stared nastily at him. I've talked with some other people inside the arena, and I want to help. I want to stop BK by whatever means necessary. Alec didn't say a word. He was feeling a mixed bag of emotions. He was mad at Tegan for what happened at the beginning of the games. He was mad at LB for leaving Jess to die. He was mad at BK for everything. He needed a second to think. Tegan and Connor watched Alec sit closer to the fire and stared directly into it. This charade from BK had lasted too long, Alec thought. He didn't know where to start now that the group had split up. What you thinking about there, bud? Connor asked. How to end this seemingly unending nightmare? Alec responded. I think the better question is, how do we end this before it ends itself? Tegan added. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Alec was clearly still mad at him. Are you always going to hold a grudge over me? Depends on if you can help us get out of here or not. Tegan's heart rate was gradually increasing. If Alec wasn't in so much physical harm, he might have killed him by now. I think I know a way out. Alec looked at him, unconvinced. Elaborate. What was the first thing you remember of the whole Hunger Games? Tegan asked the both of them. The massacre at the cornucopia? No, before then. Like, even before we got introduced to the crowds in our districts. This question seemed to stump Connor and Alec. Neither of them could remember anything before then. At least nothing that didn't feel like it was months and months ago. What's your point? Connor asked. The last thing I remember felt like it was 2 years ago in our completely normal lives with a completely normal BK in a completely normal world and a completely normal 942 crew. Okay, we get it, Tegan. What else? Alec interrupted. Do you remember anything 942 wise after the beginning of the pandemic? The two of them thought about it before they shrugged their shoulders. That's where this all happened. That's where life turned, I don't know, not normal. Okay, yeah, it's true, but it's a once-in-a-century global pandemic. Of course, that's when life turned not normal, Alex said. But wouldn't you think you'd remember the middle of the pandemic? Key moments of it? Like when it's at its peak, when it's on the decline, maybe a vaccine gets rolled out and shortens the length of the pandemic, Tegan responded. I mean, yeah, I guess. Notice that none of us have any recollection of those moments. Alec and Connor looked at each other, realizing that Tegan may be onto something. The pandemic wasn't what we thought it was. Nobody was dying because of the virus. It was a ruse to get people at home long enough for BK to execute his rise to power. Interesting, Connor said. Now skip to the part that'll help us get out of here. With everyone at home, no one could stop him. And once he reached that point, he made sure we couldn't figure out a way to stop him, Tegan continued. So now he's trusting in us for his own gain. What does that sound like? Tegan, Alex sighed. We aren't detectives. We don't have time for this. How do we get out of here? I'm getting there. Relax. Get there faster, please. Tegan rolled his eyes. The cornucopia is the way out. Tegan waited for a response, but the two of them were still perplexed. We thought the original Hunger Games were just books and movies, right? Alec and Connor looked annoyed. Just go with me for a second, please. Panem, we thought to be a work of fiction, but we can rightly assume a lot of what BK has done was based off of those events, correct? I mean, at this point, nothing is off the table, Alex said. Exactly. You want to know how I connected the dots? Tegan said, handing them a wrapper before they had time to respond. It's a Whataburger wrapper. Yes, exactly. Why does that matter? In Pan Am, the cornucopia being replenished signified important turning events of the games. It usually was the start, the arena event, and the end, right? So we can assume that our cornucopia will be replenished at similar times. What was the first turning point of these games? The opening of the games and the massacre at the cornucopia. Tegan's eyes lit up like a firecracker. Exactly. In the moments leading to our entry into the arena, Shrestha, myself, and a few others looked out to see the cornucopia being stocked for the first time, manually. Something that had never happened in Pan Am. So we can all assume that the cornucopias are restocked manually by people. That's our way out. Hold on, though, Connor questioned. We don't know for sure if BK's basing these games off of Pan Am. Maybe the cornucopia is a trap. Also, what does the Whataburger wrapper have to do with anything? Alec jumped in. Do I have to spell it out for you? Please, if it'll help me understand it better, Alex said. Let's assume, like we discussed, that BK is basing his Hunger Games like Pan Am's Hunger Games. In Pan Am, the cornucopia was replenished at key turning points throughout the games. So we are to assume the same for us. The opening massacre was the first turning point. How many people died? Alec looked at Connor. You were one of the last people there, if I recall correctly. Connor looked up, thinking back to that day. I killed 2 people. Seb killed Joey, and Tegan killed Seb, so that's 4. Hannah died, 2, so there's 5. And if you want to throw Grace in there, that makes 6 in the first few hours, Alec added. That means within the first few hours of the beginning of the games, a quarter of the people died. Safe to say that's a turning point. Now, since that was the beginning of the games, there's no way they were stocked that quickly. They're going to let the situation simmer for a while, Tegan explained. All of this makes sense so far. So yesterday seemed to be a turning point since a few people died, Alex said. 5 to be specific, Connor responded. They did the shots while you were asleep. That would bring our total up to 11 people dead within almost a half a day of combined, Tegan said. So there's our next turning point. That means the cornucopia should be getting a restocking sooner rather than later. And if it gets restocked by people, meaning there could be our exit. Boom. See, it all makes sense now, Tegan said, pumping his fist. That still doesn't explain the wrapper, Connor pondered. What does BK say every time he wants to eat Whataburger? Tegan said. Tegan asked, wants to fly the dub? Alec answered. Would you say yesterday's turning point has been beneficial for BK and his camp? I'd say so. There were about 9 of us ready to lead a revolt from inside the arena. The rain helped split us up and crush our morale for those that are living. Then the arena event yesterday was a win for BK, which means BK is flying the dub by replenishing the cornucopia. Connor and Alec understood now. That means if we headed to cornucopia right now, we might be able to get out of here, Tegan said excitedly. Wait, Alec yelled. We can't just go to the cornucopia now. They have us outmanned and severely outgunned. We can't just walk up there and fight our way out. They'll kill us. Probably without much of a fight, Connor added. So what was the point of all this yet? Tegan whined. Tegan, we have to be smart. Alec's right. We can't just go in there thinking we can waltz on out of here. Let me go. Alone. I'll scout out the area and see what we're working with. I'll bring what I can back from the cornucopia. In the meantime, you and Connor go look for other people. Gather the remaining 6 if we can work and see if we can work together to get out of here. Alec was determined to go alone for whatever reason. Tegan wanted to fight it, but with Connor siding with Alec, it was no use. Alec packed up some things and started the trek toward the cornucopia. It was a quiet scene inside the booth. Usually people would be talking chaotically, trying to put water in the flames. This time it was dead silent. Even though no mouths were talking, many eyes were. Those eyes were all locked in on BK, who just stood in front of the screen, brainstorming ideas to fix the problem. His fingers were rubbing his chin, trying to think of something, anything that could improve the situation. This wasn't the first time BK had to brainstorm, however, and that was the issue. What can we do? He asked his panel of people. Some of them were hesitant to respond. BK's right-hand man always knew if that was the case, he needed to speak up. Are you out of ideas, sir? Ricardo said. I mean, every idea we've had up to this point hasn't fixed the problem. It's just delayed it. The arena event was the only choice we had, and it bought us, what, a couple of days? But we're back at square one again. I wish I had an answer for you, sir, Ricardo said. I would have told you already if I did. BK continued to stare at the cameras. There were only 9 people left, and they weren't the most cohesive group in the world, but they still posed a threat, as the interaction with Alec, Connor, and Tegan proved. He turned around, sat down, and put his feet up on the table, still looking up, lost in thought. He took a deep breath. I don't think we have a choice anymore. I think we have to do it. Ricardo's eyes got wide. Are you sure about this? If that got out, it would ruin us, and more importantly, ruin you. If they get out alive, they will ruin us, BK said assertively, pointing at the cameras. We've got to take that risk, don't you think? Ricardo tapped his foot nervously. It was such a big risk, but what choice did they have? If you think that's our last option, I won't stop you, sir. Then it's settled. Let's continue with the restocking the cornucopia. That way, that forces them to make a move over near there. Everywhere else, get the blackmail set up, ready to go, with Connor and Tegan at the top of the queue. They're going to try to recruit and get the remaining people on their side. We've got to make it difficult for them to spread the word. How difficult, sir? Maximum. No mercy for them. You got it, sir. And what about Alec's position within the blackmails? Keep them ready to go just in case, but I have a feeling they won't work as well as some others would. Some other people's would. What makes you say that? BK watched Alec hike towards the cornucopia. He had a determined look on his face, and that was enough for BK. Just a feeling.